Recently, Donald Trump posted an AI-generated image to Truth Social, depicting himself in a white robe, physically healing a sick man. Hours later, following a wave of criticism from religious leaders, the image was scrubbed from the platform. Trump replaced it almost immediately with a different image. This one showed Jesus Christ actively embracing the president, captioned with a note that while his critics might not like it, he thought it was quite nice. Trump later insisted the first post was meant to portray him as a doctor making people better, but the images appeared just as a series of long-standing tensions with the Vatican reached a breaking point. The center of that opposition is Pope Leo XIV. As the first American-born leader of the Catholic Church, he has spent months publicly challenging the administration's most significant policy decisions. In 2024, Trump won the Catholic vote by a 12-point margin. Now, he is locked in a direct conflict with the spiritual head of the world's 1.4 billion Catholics. This is more than a social media spat. It is a test of whether a political mandate from the voters can override the traditional moral authority of the Church. The rift began with the administration's mass deportation efforts. From the start of his papacy, Leo has been a consistent critic of the program. He recently told reporters that the treatment of immigrants under these policies is extremely disrespectful to human dignity, echoing a stance held by his predecessor, Pope Francis. The White House responded by targeting the Church's financial resources. The administration abruptly terminated an $11 million federal contract with Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Miami. The move forces the closure of a program that has sheltered unaccompanied migrant children for over 60 years. The administration justified the cut as a consolidation of unused facilities, but the timing suggested a clear act of retaliation. Miami Archbishop Thomas Wensky defended the program, calling the decision baffling, and noting that the government would be hard-pressed to replicate the Church's level of competence in serving vulnerable populations. By pulling this funding, the administration signaled it views the Catholic Church not as a moral guide, but as a political opponent to be disciplined. The conflict moved to global warfare with the launch of Operation Epic Fury, massive joint U.S. and Israeli airstrikes targeting the Iranian mainland. In the early days of the bombing, Trump warned that if Iran did not comply, an entire civilization will die tonight. Pope Leo issued a response from his tour in Africa, denouncing world leaders who use the name of God to justify military and economic gain. He offered a blunt theological rebuke, stating that God does not listen to the prayers of those who wage war, but instead rejects them. With those words, the Pope attempted to strip the administration of the religious justification typically used to rally support for American military intervention. The administration's allies pushed back. Vice President J.D. Vance, a Catholic convert, publicly challenged the Pope, telling the Vatican to be careful and stick to matters of morality rather than public policy. Speaker Mike Johnson and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth also cited just war doctrine, arguing that the strikes against Iran were a defensive last resort necessary to save millions of innocent lives. But that interpretation was flatly rejected by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. They issued a rare, direct correction of the administration's theological claims. The bishops argued that the Iran bombings failed to meet the Church's strict criteria for a just war, noting that there was no evidence the strikes were a response to an imminent threat. By the end of the week, the administration's attempt to claim the moral high ground through Scripture had been systematically dismantled by the Church's own institutional leadership. This high-level theological dispute is now creating a visible rift among the president's most loyal Catholic supporters. This graph shows the statistical fallout. Since the feud began, Trump's approval among Catholic voters has plummeted to 48%, a significant drop from the 55% he carried in the 2024 election. The administration's attempt to use faith as a political weapon appears to be alienating the very demographic it was designed to engage. Donald Trump continues to rely on the spectacle of strength and AI-generated sacred imagery to validate his standing with religious voters. But Pope Leo is demonstrating the role of religious authority as a restraint on the state, insisting that military might does not equate to moral innocence. It leaves millions of Americans with a choice that hasn't been this stark in decades. When the president and the Pope take opposing sides on the value of a human life, who do you follow?